In a post-industrial world, professional sports have proved to be incredibly lucrative and profitable. Whether it's cricket, football, baseball, basketball, or tennis, you name it, fans can't seem to get enough. No, I'm not talking about wins and losses, and no, I'm not necessarily talking about score updates. I'm talking about the athletes, their training methods, their agents, the franchises, and the team owners as well. Information in sports is power, and people love to be in the know. But what is the future of sports media coverage and the business of athletics? And what does the future hold for the fans for whom sports are so important? Joining me now to discuss the evolving landscape of sports, media, and business is Adam White, founder and CEO of Front Office Sports. Front Office Sports, we should point out, is owned by Redbird Capital Partners and owned in part by IMI, which is the parent company of the national producer of this podcast. In 2021, Front Office Sports was named one of Fast Company's most innovative companies. It also earned the title of AdWeek's Hottest in Sports for 2022 and 2024, among other accolades. Adam White, thanks so much for joining us in Abu Dhabi.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So what is Front Office Sports? It's a saturated marketplace.
Yep.
At first, when you look at it, you think, okay, what do we need another sports website? What is Front Office Sports?
Yeah, as simple as form, Front Office Sports is the multimedia platform. So we're covering everything that happens off the field. So we're the leading multimedia platform covering the business of sports, both domestically in the U.S. and globally really as well, because there is no one who is doing quite what we're doing in the U.S. where we're based, and then also globally, which is really great. And we found a really interesting niche at this point because of the fact that sports has become, as you hinted at in the intro, very sophisticated, really interesting. This is, we believe, the next evolution of fandom. And fans care about how much athletes are making. Fans care about these owners. These owners, in large part, are larger-than-life figures. And so it's really kind of over the past decade in which we've been doing this, it's really started to show as like, hey, this is what people really, really care about and what they're talking about with their friends, their family members, etc.
Now, the first thing I noticed when I went to the site, there's a ticker right across the top of crawl. You'd think you were at CNBC or Bloomberg, but you're showing all the stock prices there. That's kind of speaks volumes about what you're all about. Talk a little bit about the ticker and...
Yeah, I mean, that's purposeful, right? Like we want people, and we've talked about this ad hoc, and is we really want people to say, okay, like, and the easiest way we describe it to some people who don't know is Front Office Sports in a lot of ways is like the Wall Street Journal of sports, or we want to be the Wall Street Journal of sports, right? We want to be business first. Everything that we're covering is big picture. It feels more enterprise in nature, and again, focused on the financial side of things. So the ticker at the top, when you think about it, some of the biggest companies in the world are sports companies: Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, right? And have never really been covered as such. They've been covered in small pieces as part of a broader business coverage, whether it's at WSJ or Bloomberg or the Financial Times, but they've never been like, hey, this is something that actually should be a real focus area. And that's what we've kind of carved out.
How old was it? Where did you found it?
Yeah, so we founded it in 2014, so it'll be 10 years as a brand, about 5 years full-time as a business. So we got our first round of investment at the end of 18. So our first full-time year was 19. I started in college at the University of Miami and have been working on it ever since. So it's been really interesting to see. And as I hit it up previously, it's really about the fact of the modern sports fan, what we like to call prosumers, professional consumers, people who are probably listening to this podcast, that they really care about sports and they really care about business. And this is like the combining of both of the things that people really, really love. And so we've seen a ton of uptick in engagement and reach and audience, both domestically and internationally, just because of how much of a focus area this now has become inside the broader, let's call it, sports ecosystem.
You mentioned you went to the University of Miami, known colloquially as the U, of course. How much of that did impact you? And I ask that because Miami is kind of perfect for the founding of this particular site. You have sports. You have a great sports environment there. You've got agents. You've got models. You've got entrepreneurship. How did Miami did it shape your vision at all?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a class project. Like this was what was part of a class project, right? So at the very beginning of the business, it really started as what was an informational interview product. So I would sit down similarly to the conversation we're having here, and I would call up people and I would say, hey, how did you get your job in sports? One of the class projects we had my freshman year was we had to interview someone and then present that, because they would always say it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. I think it's a mix of both. Like you have to know what you're doing, but you also have to know the right people. And so I took that idea and I said, well, why don't I just continue to interview people? I did 110 informational interviews over the course of the first year of the business. And so that's how it all got started. Obviously, it's drastically changed now and we're multi-platform, not 24/7. We want to be eventually 24/7 news and information service, which is very different than when we started. But Miami was the fundamental part of this. And as you mentioned, the sports culture there in the broader city. Unfortunately, the teams at the university while I were there were not very good in the time that I was there. I'm hoping we're going to have a renaissance here sooner rather than later. But yeah, for the most part, it was a great area to be around. And then also there was a lot of alumni in the sports ecosystem that went to Miami. So I was able to leverage that and say, hey, I'm a fellow Cane, would love to pick your brain, would love to tell your story. And that was one of the areas in which we were able to really make some movement.
There is that attitude, though. For lack of a better word, I think it's abused. There's that swagger there. There's that entrepreneurial spirit, I think, in Miami that really kind of, you see it sprinkled throughout that website.
Totally.
So that's pretty cool. Now, among the various sections I see there, I do see finance, real estate, stadiums, private equity, and law. So this is not your parents' or grandparents' sports publication at all.
No. That's the point, right? Like the idea, and we always tell people, we're niche and focus, not scale, right? Our audience, we have million cross-platform social followers. We're doing 250 million social impressions a month. We are the #1 sports publisher on LinkedIn, makes a lot of sense. But the idea is that we're niche in focus, not scale, because like all we focus on is the business of sports. So oftentimes, even if we don't break the news, whether it's a big story or, NBA media rights happening right now, that we drive the conversation because our audience is so accustomed to what we're putting out is always in this lane of like how, sports impacts business and culture, right? And like that's really where we found to be like the sweet spot for us. And we've learned a lot along the way. We tried other things and it really just never worked. And we said, look, we're going to own this. We're going to own this niche and we're going to see what happens.
I notice also there's an emerging sports section. What does that mean?
I mean, it depends on where you're at, right? So for the US where we're based, and I would say about 70 to 80% of our audience, North America, something like cricket could be an emerging sport, right? We saw what happened with the U.S. team in the tournament this year, beating Pakistan, and like that was like an amazing moment of cultural relevance. It was an amazing moment of like national pride in the U.S. So that could be something. You could be also talking about things like Sail GP. You could also be talking about things like Premier Lacrosse League, right? Like as you were talking about again in your intro, there is so much fervor around sports, around IP ownership, around all of these things. And you're starting to see all of these emerging leagues and sports continuing to pop up outside of your core, legacy sports that you were talking about, football, basketball, soccer, hockey, depending on where you're at and more.
I would imagine your Rolodex, and when I say I mean your company's Rolodex, because of all these vertical markets is what I'll call them. It must be an impressive Rolodex of people, agents, companies, sports equipment manufacturers that want to talk to you guys first. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I think it's getting more and more like that, right? I think this area of coverage has really been, I would say, focused more from a trade standpoint. So, if you're looking at the market, it's less of a WSJ and Bloomberg and more of an AdWeek, Ad Age. You're familiar with the US media market. So it's more, that's how this category has been covered. And our idea is, wait a second, there is a broad audience who care about the business of sports, right? Because it's everything, right? It's team values, it's contracts, it's what's happening in the Euros, it's what's happening with the Olympics, right? Most of what's going on in sports is being driven by what's happening off sports, outside of the field of play. And so that is for us a really important fact and a really important, indicator. As we saw when we were building the platform on LinkedIn, we could see everyone's job titles. That's a beautiful thing about LinkedIn is that you know where these people work. And we were seeing private equity, finance, marketing, media, technology, blah, blah, blah. So it's like the core grouping of audience who work in sports. Obviously, that was the audience that we've built around. But we started to see over the course of past 18 months, the audience just really, really expand. And so now how do we make sure we're, of course, servicing our core audience, but allowing ourselves to write and engage and create content that is also going to serve the broader audience that we're starting to see come to the platform.
I don't want to get too off track, but you mentioned LinkedIn, and I think that's interesting because here in this region, especially in the UAE, LinkedIn is incredibly popular. And that's surprising to a lot of people when I tell them that in the United States or elsewhere. What about LinkedIn did you find works so well?
I think and we were talking about, there's a lot of noise. There's not a lot of noise on LinkedIn, right? There has never been a lot of publishers who are focused on that platform. There's not been I would say, a push for people to become, now there is, I think, a little bit more, but like people to become personalities on the platform. And LinkedIn, specifically in the US, maybe it's already happening here in this region, has really started to lean more heavily into news and information, as you've seen some of the tumult and I would say just all of the things around Twitter or now X, right, and the platform and what's going on that platform. So LinkedIn has leaned heavily in, which is great. And again, when we talk about the two things that people really, really love, people love sports and people love money, right? And so that just makes so much sense on the platform. And then we've tailored a lot of the content on that platform to fit with what you would expect to see on LinkedIn. It's career things, it's career advice, it's like Tom Brady's speech, right? And so we've seen a lot of success with that.
So I didn't get to dig too much into this next part I want to ask you about, but front office sports, you have a learning platform. Is that accurate? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So basically what the insight was there, and we try to build what we like to call like a hub and spoke model, right? So the hub is the front office sports core media brand, which is, your .com, your social channels, everything like that. And our belief is that if we can get people into that ecosystem, allow them to trust us, then we take them into other spokes of the business. So events, education, which is our learning arm. And so with learning, we kind of looked around the ecosystem. And if you see these big tech companies, Google, LinkedIn, et cetera, they all have certificate programs, right? Become Google certified, become HubSpot certified, be this, and this certified. And I was like, why don't we do that for our platform? Why not? Like, let's see if we can talk to a brand, pitch a brand, and see if they'll underwrite it. And so we went to market and we got Pepsi to underwrite the first one around sports marketing. And we said, well, if we can create a curriculum and a digital online education platform that feels almost like what you would be getting at a university or something like that, but delivering it in a way where the brand underwrites it and then provides the end consumer with a certificate of, hey, I took this, there might be something there. And, to date, we have, I believe, 6 different courses. Each of them are anywhere between 6 to 8 lessons long. There's quizzes in between each of the lessons, and everyone gets a digital certification. And we've had, probably up to this point, 40 to 50,000 people who've taken the courses. The average time spent is 2 hours, right? So it's an amazing engagement tool. People post it on their LinkedIn, people post it on their resume. But, we always say the only reason it works is because people trust the brand. People know the brand is going to deliver high quality content, is going to be consistent. Because without that, like for them, why would I take a course from a brand that I don't trust?
Are you going to plan on, and maybe you've already done this, but are you going to plan on having any symposiums, exhibitions, speaking, for lack of better, conventions?
Yeah, we're starting to where I would say we're walking then running into the event space. We did something in Cannes, which is an advertising festival that just happened last week in France. We have an event coming up in the Hamptons back in the States, and then we're also going to do another one in New York around media. So we're really trying to focus about building franchises around our reporters. How do we build editorially driven events, right, where we're bringing people, it's what we're really calling live journalism. And then this is not anything different than what a Wall Street Journal or a Bloomberg would be doing, but we're just a little bit more nascent in it. So events will play a big role of the business going forward, and we're starting to see real demand for that, which is great.
What is your strongest section? And when I ask that, I mean, I don't want to say what is the sport that does the best for you, but I guess I am asking that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it depends on the time of year and what's happening. Right now, the strongest section is everything that's happening around the NBA media rights, because that's what people want to know, right? All of those dominoes falling in variety of ways, whether it's what's happening with Charles Barkley, whether it's what's happening with NBC, is Turner gone, right? Like that right now is driving a lot of the conversation, whereas 2-3 weeks ago, maybe even 4 weeks ago, it was all about stuff, private equity in college sports. And everyone's talking about like what's going on there and revenue sharing now coming to college sports. And so it really depends on the time of the year and the calendar and everything like that. But typically, we've always seen that people are enthralled by media. People love stories about personalities, talent, what's going on. Because again, the media rights deals predominantly, again, North American based, is really what drives the business of sports, right? That's what's driving all of these team valuations. That's what's driving player contracts. I think we just had in the newsletter today, Dwayne Wade was on his podcast saying that players like coming into the NBA now will make $1 billion playing basketball because of the media rights deal, right? That's just crazy, right? And so now because of that, and I think you're starting to see a lot of the likes of the LeBrons and the Stephs, we like to say all the athletes want to be business people and all the business people want to be athletes or were athletes at some point. And so there's like this interesting inflection there. And especially if you're an NBA player and you're going to make $1 billion, God willing, you don't spend all of that money. And so you're going to need places to allocate that capital. And that's why you're seeing them start production companies, doing investments, getting into private equity. And so this is where this like sophistication of the business of sports, it becomes really interesting in the sense that like there's so many different tentacles. We've just talked about real estate. We've just talked about private equity. We've just talked about finance, tech. Like all of the major industries have some sort of exposure to sports. And that's what makes this category so fascinating.
NBA is incredibly popular over here. What is the latest with the media rights?
I think right now what we're hearing, what we kind of like was the general consensus is you're down to 3 main players. It's ESPN, it's NBC, and it's Amazon. Is there a fourth potential package for the likes of a Warner Brothers Discovery? There's been discussion there. We don't know. I think it's hopefully going to be ironed out, my guess, after the NBA draft. I don't think they're going to announce that the NBA draft happens tonight. I don't think they're going to announce it, anytime between now and then, but who knows? But the last few weeks of reporting and focus has really been on the fact that it's probably going to be 3 people, and it's going to be ESPN, it's going to be Amazon, and it's going to be NBC coming back to the NBA after, I think, almost a 20-year hiatus.
What's going to be the toughest sector or toughest sport, I should say, for you all to crack?
From a coverage standpoint?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it just depends on where we are trying. Like if we're trying to cover the NFL as someone who or as an organization who would cover what's happening on the field, there's too much competition there, right? I think luckily for us, there's still on the business, what we like to call business of football, business of baseball, whatever it may be, there's still a lot of runway and there's still a lot of leeway and there's still a lot of interest. And so we have a lot of space in there. But there's more people who are starting to focus on it from just big insiders and et cetera. So I think, are we going to be like the number one at the NFL? Probably not, right? Just because of the fact that you have that ingrained setup of people. But is there other areas like hockey could be really interesting, right? Women's sports could be really interesting. Basketball, global, right? Like I think there's in one of the things, as part of the Redbird IMI deal is really about the fact that like, is there an opportunity to take this global, right? Like, even in regions like this, sports has become a massive player, right? Both in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, right? With all the things that's happening in this region. And so our belief is that, and again, why we're so excited to partner with the Redbird IMI team is the ability to basically, can we build or take what we've built domestically in North America, internationally to key markets like the UK, Middle East, et cetera, where sports is becoming much more sophisticated.
What potential do you see offhand in the Middle East market, the GCC market?
I think there's a ton of potential, right? We were just meeting with the Department of Culture and Tourism just a little bit ago, and we're talking about all of the things that they're doing, right? Whether it's soccer, whether it's basketball, whether it's Formula One, UFC. I mean, I was just on another interview this afternoon, and we were talking about like Vegas was not seen as a sports town. Las Vegas was not seen as a sports town. They brought the hockey team there. They brought the women's basketball team there. They brought the Raiders there and the Super Bowl and March Madness. And all of a sudden now,
Formula One
this past year. And now all of a sudden, it's like the sports capital of the U.S., right? And so I think similarly here, you have a burgeoning opportunity of this part of the world. And I would assume probably in this part of the world, they already view themselves as being the sports capital of this part of the world, right? And so I think that is really interesting. And I think, again, as you sophisticate the economy around that and the infrastructure around that, there's going to be more and more storylines and more capital coming in and also more capital going out. That's the other thing too, is like everyone in the US is trying to figure out what's happening over here for a variety of reasons. Where are the key players in the Middle East investing their capital? Where are they making bets? Obviously, all of the things that are happening with Live Golf and all, it's just, there's so much happening in and around the sports ecosystem here that the U.S. cares about. And also there's a lot that's happening in the U.S. that the Middle East cares about. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity there.
So at the end of the day, we are called the Business Extra Podcast. And I always have to ask people, what is the business model? I know that it gets complicated, but is it advertising revenue, subscription?
Yeah, right now it's predominantly advertising. We're growing that business pretty rapidly. I think the business will be up 100% year over year, which we're really excited about, coming out of just what was kind of a depressed ad market, over the past few years domestically in the United States. And so advertising, we're starting to get into our accolades business, our events business. Subscription eventually, right? It'll come. I mean, but like it's not something we're rushing into because we want to try and drive as much audience at this point of the business. But I think going forward, we're trying to, just like I was talking about hub and spoke, we're trying to make sure that the revenue is diversified beyond that, because we don't want to be in a situation where we get caught up or the economy comes crashing down around us. And the business is still doing amazing, but the only reason it's not doing amazing is because of the fact that the ad market is soft. And so we want to insulate ourselves from that and making sure that we're being able to drive commerce and commercial opportunities at almost every place in which we're activating, which we're sharing content, which we're posting. And like one of our internal mantras right now is we have to be commercially focused, not influenced. Obviously, as a media company, you know this. You don't want to be influenced by advertisers or anyone who's like that, but we want to be focused on how do we build products and franchises that are commercially viable, that brands want to align with, not influence. And I think that's a huge focus for us.
At the end of the day, what sports do you prefer to watch? Growing up, what did you...
Yeah, I mean, I watched a little bit of everything. I played baseball in both elementary and middle school and high school and into college. But, I really enjoy college football. I really do enjoy college football. I've been a Formula One fan for a long time. Like my dad was like a Michael Schumacher fan. Like this wasn't just a Drive to Survive fandom. So I've liked and enjoyed Formula One. I watch a little bit of everything. I always tell people, I have so much going on that I don't really watch a lot of sports just because of the fact that it comes on at times in which I'm doing something. So, overall, I like I said, college football, big hockey fan. Arizona, unfortunately, just lost their hockey team. We'll see what happens if they bring them back. But college football and then a little bit of everything. Like I just enjoy it because, again, it's a cultural conversation, right? It's like a fabric of culture. You need to have an understanding of what's going on in sports, just like you need to in business, because of the fact that like it's probably a conversation you're going to have with a business partner, a friend, a family member, whatever it may be.
Is there anything else about front office sports that I'm not asking or that nobody else is asking that you want people to know?
I think for us, it's really about knowing that I think the influence is really real, right? I think some people don't understand just like the level of people who follow us, who engage with us, whether it's celebrities, executives, what may have you. And so we see that, obviously, and which is great. And I think that's the big thing is like, this is something that people really, really do care about. The business of sports is something that everyone from a mid-level manager to the most senior executives at a variety of organizations care about. And it's what they're reading, right? Like every single day. Mark Cuban has been a long-time reader of the business for forever. And owner of Dallas Mavericks, billionaire entrepreneur. Like that is our kind of, let's call it our ICP. Like that is our like person that we're trying to reach. Doesn't have to be a billionaire necessarily or a team owner, but the person who has the sensibilities in both business and sports. And I think it's been really interesting to see the maturation, but I think that's the big thing for us is the brand is still new, right? 5 years as a business, but I think we are much more influential than most people believe.
Adam White, thanks so much for joining us in Abu Dhabi on Business Extra. Safe travels back to Miami.
Thanks so much, Cody. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to Business Extra. Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasting content so you can get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. This podcast was produced by Doa Fareed and Arthur Edison.